Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at one of California's most haunting, truly agonizing cold cases, the disappearance of Kristin Smart. For over a quarter of a century, this mystery cast a massive shadow over the Central Coast, leaving a family completely broken and a community desperately searching for answers. So, we're going to examine the timeline, the investigation, and the unprecedented legal proceedings that finally brought a measure of justice. And just so you know, all of this is drawn directly from court records, news reports, and the enduring public effort to uncover the truth. 1,359. As the prosecutor pointed out during the trial, that is the exact number of Sundays the Smart family waited for a phone call that simply never came. It's heartbreaking. Kristin was a beloved older sibling, a 19-year-old Cal Poly student who religiously called her family every single Sunday. The day before she vanished, she left this happy voicemail for her mother about some good news she wanted to share. They literally never heard her voice again. Which leads us to the monumental question driving this entire explainer. How do you actually prove a murder without a body? Well, in the American legal system, establishing that a crime occurred and then proving beyond a reasonable doubt who committed it without the physical remains of the victim, it's an immense hurdle. Law enforcement had to rely on this incredibly complex web of circumstantial evidence, witness testimony from decades past, and distinct behavioral patterns to convince a jury 25 years after the fact.
Part 1. A conviction without a body. Here, we'll see how a landmark 2022 verdict ultimately brought some long-awaited justice to this tragic story.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 2. The night she vanished. Flashing back to Memorial Day weekend, May 1996 in San Luis Obispo, let's carefully walk through this chilling timeline step by step. So, on Friday night, Kristin attended an off-campus party on Crandall Avenue. Court records show she was seen highly intoxicated. In fact, one witness described her as unsteady and appearing, quote, spacey. By 1:30 a.m., she was found passed out on a neighbor's lawn. Two students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis, helped her to her feet to walk her back to her dorm. Then, suddenly, another student from the party, Paul Flores, appeared out of the darkness and offered to help. When Davis left the group, Flores took over. During that walk, Flores stopped twice to hug an incapacitated Kristin, repeatedly urging Anderson to just go on ahead without them. Anderson refused to leave until they got near her own dorm. At that point, she made Flores promise to get Kristin safely to her room. That was the final sighting. Kristin was never seen again. Which brings us to part 3, a decades-long cold case. Let's look at the agonizing years where the investigation basically hit a wall. For years, the investigation painfully stalled out without any physical remains to go on. But Kristin's disappearance did leave a permanent protective legacy for others. To prevent the kinds of institutional delays the Smarts faced early on, the California legislature unanimously passed the Kristin Smart Campus Security Act. This law is absolutely crucial. It requires all publicly funded educational institutions in the state to establish agreements with local police departments regarding cases of violence or missing students. It basically ensured that no other family would ever face the same institutional hurdles the Smarts did. Moving right along to part 4, the evidence mounts. Because despite the glaring lack of a body, the overwhelming weight of the clues painted a very clear picture. What's really fascinating here is how these seemingly isolated facts stack together to form this devastating narrative. First up, in the days right after the disappearance, Paul Flores had a black eye. And he gave police changing stories about it, first claiming he didn't know how he got it, then saying basketball, and then claiming he hid it working on his truck. Second, 4 separate certified cadaver dogs were brought into his dormitory. All 4 of them alerted specifically to room 128, which was Flores' room, and exclusively to his mattress. Years later, ground-penetrating radar found anomalies under his father, Ruben Flores' deck. And finally, authorities secured a wiretap on the family's phones, revealing some highly suspicious conversations. Let me give you an example of what they heard. In a 2020 wiretap, Paul's mother, Susan Flores, was caught speaking to Paul about a wildly popular investigative podcast called Your Own Backyard by Chris Lambert. This podcast was bringing intense, renewed public scrutiny to the case. Susan told her son, "I need you to listen to everything they say so we can punch holes in it. You're the one that can tell me." This recording was played right to the jury, strongly suggesting a family actively coordinating to protect themselves from new evidence coming to light. So the real smoking gun here is what investigators actually found beneath Ruben Flores' deck when they finally excavated. An archaeologist testified to finding a 6 by 4 foot anomaly, The lack of continuity in the soil showed it had definitely been dug by hand with a shovel. Crucially, the soil had dark staining completely consistent with human decomposition, and lower samples even tested positive for human blood. Now, while no extractable DNA remained to definitively prove it was Kristin, the physical evidence strongly suggested a body had been buried there and subsequently moved. And this brilliantly illustrates the prosecution's core argument exactly as summarized in the appellate court records. During the trial, 2 women testified that Flores had drugged and raped them years after Kristin's disappearance, establishing a terrifying predatory pattern. The prosecutor looked at the jury and argued that to find Flores not guilty, you would have to believe that a serial drugger who was obsessed with Kristin and managed to isolate her in a deeply intoxicated state mere feet from his dorm room simply let her walk away into the night. The appellate court noted that this specific evidence made the case against him totally overwhelming. Part 5. The dual juries. Trying this case required some incredibly rare legal maneuvering. Because of the massive local publicity, the trial was actually moved to Salinas. There, Paul and his father Ruben were tried simultaneously, but in front of 2 completely separate juries. And these juries ultimately reached divergent conclusions based on the legal thresholds they had to meet. Paul Flores was found guilty of first-degree murder, committed during an attempted rape, and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Just recently, the California Supreme Court denied his appeal. On the other hand, his father, Ruben Flores, who was charged as an accessory after the fact for allegedly helping hide the body, was acquitted by his respective jury. So the legal fates of the father and the son went in entirely different directions.
Finally, Part 6. The search continues, bringing us to the present day because the story is far from fully resolved.
Yes, the criminal trial has concluded, but the legal pressure is absolutely still on. Wrongful death civil lawsuits filed by the Smart family against the Flores family, which had to be paused way back in 2017 pending the criminal trial, are finally nearing resolution after 27 years. And as we can see from recent community updates, this search for physical evidence remains incredibly active. Just recently, search warrants involving ground-penetrating radar and digging were executed at Susan Flores' property. They are keeping the pressure on, and the public's eyes are still firmly fixed on the case. Which leaves us with this final, truly poignant thought. With Paul Flores firmly behind bars and the legal walls continuing to close in through the civil courts and these ongoing property searches, will the Smart family finally be able to bring Kristin home? You see, the justice system has delivered a conviction, but true closure for those 1,359 Sundays, and literally all the days since, will only really come when Kristin is finally found. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.